Bring in Republican Senator Rob Portman from Ohio, who sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, always good to see you. I want to get your reaction to former CIA Director John Brennan's tweet calling President Trump's threat to those who don't vote with the U.S. He called it outrageous, saying the president has qualities, or is at least displaying qualities, of a narcissistic, vengeful autocrat.
Well, look, I think the people I represent who are paying those dues to the UN, and again, about 1/3 of the peacekeeping is paid for by our taxpayers. I think that, they deserve to have a representation in the UN, which is Nikki Haley, that stands up for us. And I think it's totally appropriate. I do think it should be an aggregation of all positions. In other words, not just this one position. You got to look at our alliances around the world to determine who's helping us and who's not. And that should be one of the factors that's considered. And by the way, Jake, we are so blessed right now. We've probably got the greatest alliance any country's ever had in the history of the world. Despite all the concerns people talk about and the expressions of concern about countries, splitting with us on individual issues like this one, we've got a great alliance right now, and it's very important. We need to keep it.
What are your thoughts on the UN condemnation of the decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem? The vote was 128-9 in favor of condemning America.
Well, I think it reflects a continued effort by the United Nations and frankly, a double standard with regard to Israel. I am concerned about it, but it's not surprising. The whole issue of boycotts and divestments and sanctions, BDS, is something that Senator Ben Cardin and I have been involved in for some time, trying to get the United Nations, including the United Nations Human Rights Commission and other groups, to understand that Israel's being held to a different standard than other countries. You mentioned some of the countries that violate human rights. You missed Iran and North Korea, by the way. But I mean, it's ironic that here we are talking about the move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem as being the seminal issue in Middle East peace, when there are so many other issues that need to be addressed, as you mentioned in Syria, as you mentioned, there are human rights violations going on in other countries in the Middle East as well that are far more important for the UN to be taking a look at.
So why do you think it is that the United Nations, over the last 5 to 10 years, that more than 80%, every year, the resolutions they have condemning a specific country, more than 80% of that time, it's been Israel? What do you think is the reason, other than they bash Israel all the time? Why do they single out Israel all the time?
Well, I think it is a double standard, holding Israel to a higher standard in terms of these specific issues, including the human rights issues. But I think it's also a reflection of the fact that, a lot of the Arab countries in the region have decided to take this position. And, it's frankly, despite the fact that their commercial ties with Israel have increased, or diplomatic ties have increased, sort of a public stance and then a real-world stance where you actually see more support, interestingly, for Israel in the Middle East broadly.
Do you worry? I know you supported the move of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. But do you worry that that takes the United States out of the peace process as an honest broker in any way, that it doesn't advance the peace process?
I would like to think that any individual act that we take might have a big reaction in terms of the peace process, but you have to look over the last 2 decades and see all the efforts we have made, none of which have been successful in bringing the Palestinians, the Israelis together. I served in the Bush administration, where we made a valiant effort. In the Obama administration, Senator Kerry, then Secretary of State Kerry, made an effort. None have been successful, so I have a hard time believing that this one is going to have a detrimental impact. We'll see. I think it could actually open up a dialogue, conceivably, that may not be there now. I do think the United States needs to continue to promote this idea of a two-state solution. I support that. I think, most observers believe that that's the ultimate solution here. And I think the Trump administration is very sincere about trying to come up with some new ways to encourage the sides to come together and come up with a more lasting agreement.
Before you go, I have to ask you, I know you're happy about the tax bill that passed. There's a provision in it that I'm wondering if you would comment on. It's going to impose a 12.5% tax on profits made in foreign companies. In the U.S. tax world, Puerto Rico, which is, of course, part of the United States, it's considered a foreign country. Now, you have said, you've been active saying that the U.S. needs to play a pivotal role in the recovery of Puerto Rico after the hurricane devastation. The governor of Puerto Rico says that this provision in the tax bill could devastate their economy, which is already incredibly fragile. Does this need to be fixed?
Yeah, I think it does need to be looked at, and I think the concern that Puerto Rico has more broadly is about losing a particular tax incentive for companies to invest in Puerto Rico, and that's something we ought to look at as well. And frankly, some of us were promoting a proposal in the tax bill that would create sort of an enterprise zone in Puerto Rico. That was not ultimately successful because the parliamentarian here in the Senate said that it didn't meet the budget requirements. It was taken out. But there's an interest in helping Puerto Rico more in terms of encouraging investment, encouraging jobs, because that's part of the way we get Puerto Rico back on its feet.
All right, Senator Rob Portman of Ohio.